Good evening and welcome to Inside Government, a show put together by CU Community College and shown on Spectrum, Verizon Fios, the Auburn Regional Media Access, ARMA, as well as Win 89.1, the college's radio station. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. Tonight we have with us as our guest, Auburn Superintendent of Schools, Jeff Parozzola. We had originally planned to come in here to talk about foundation aid, and that was the original plan, but a number of things have overridden that. Though we will get to that and why it's causing you a multi-million-dollar gap in your budget. But obviously the Parkland shooting in Florida, as well as the news from Cayuga Centers last week, formerly known as Cayuga County Home for Children, kind of take precedence this week. So, welcome.
Mr. Cosentino, it's been a busy last few weeks.
Okay, so let me start off with something a little different.
Okay.
You like hockey?
I do.
Now, do you like hockey this week?
I love hockey, especially last night.
So last night, Auburn hockey had a great night.
They certainly did.
Were you there?
You know what? I wasn't. My son had his wrestling banquet last night, so I was at Springside for the banquet.
So how did they? So are you?
I was I was calling it out as the banquet was going on. So Mr. Morgan was texting me the entire night.
And the score was
5-1.
And where do they go from now?
They are going to be playing in Ogdensburg on Saturday
way
at 3
north.
o'clock, way up north near Canada.
And optimistic on that one?
Oh, absolutely.
So that has most likely been the high point of your
That has been
week.
Absolutely the high point of our week, and you know what? And it's great having the kids back after February break.
Oh, just
always love to have the kids back.
Seeing some of the photos and some of the videos from last night, just congratulations.
Well, thank you, and congratulations to the hockey team and Coach Lowe. Great job with those kids.
So in the wake, I do want to turn to a more somber, not want to, but we need to. Parkland, the shooting roughly 2 weeks ago, has that got Auburn reevaluating what you do when it comes to school safety?
Well, you know, and again, our thoughts and prayers go out to all the victims and their families. Just tragic, absolutely tragic. And the thing that's concerning and alarming to me is that it continues to happen. And what are we doing as a society?
So I asked that question because on Friday night after Parkland, I received an email, and I don't know if I get these because I'm on your email list or however, but you had a concern that had been raised earlier in the day in the middle school. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming after Parkland, 48 hours before, you are all in super hyperdrive. So what was that incident, and how did Parkland change how you reacted and got the word out to parents?
You know, and I think that's a great question because the message that I'm trying to get out to families and to staff and to children is speak out. If you have a concern or you hear something, we need to speak out. We need to tell somebody so that we can investigate. And you know, there was some conversation, I think, talking about the Florida shooting in one of the classes that another student overheard. And it might have gotten, the messaging might have been different and went home and said,
I don't mean to belittle it, but like a game of telephone. You start with one message
Correct.
in kindergarten. By the time you get to the 7th kid, it went from ordering a pizza to we're going to take a ski vacation to Hawaii.
Correct, and I think that's what it was. And I think the kids were having, but I think they were having conversations about, you know, what would you do if there was a shooting, or man, could you ever imagine somebody? And I think it got taken out of context.
So you have to imagine.
Oh, absolutely. We got a call from a parent. Mr. Oliver reacted quickly and swiftly.
Mr. Oliver?
Mr. Oliver is our Auburn Junior High School principal, who got a hold of Officer Carnasali, who's the SRO at Auburn Junior High School. They went to investigate it. They spoke to a student. Student said, well, that's not exactly what was said. They went to talk to the other student. He wasn't in school that day. They went right to the house, investigated, and again. So it was an incredible, it was not a threat that was to be taken serious, but I wanted the community to know.
So you sent an email out, you alerted the media. So is that is the normal process from here on out, but it was beforehand, wasn't it? Or is it just more hyper now?
I think it is more hyper, but yes, that is our process anyways. We always have investigated, but I don't think that everybody always comes to us when there's a concern or a rumor out there. I think that parents, if parents have any concerns, or children, they need to speak out. If something doesn't feel right or doesn't look right, speak out and let us investigate.
You mentioned Officer Carnicelli. He is an SRO, a school resource officer. Do you have? They are armed SROs, correct?
Correct.
And do we have an SRO in every school?
I have 2 SROs at the high school, 2 armed SROs. I have Officer Carnicelli at Auburn Junior High School, and unfortunately, I only have 1 SRO for all 5 elementary buildings. He rotates, so he does 2 buildings a day, half day in each. So he gets into 1 building twice a week.
So how do you prevent, from a security point of view, a deranged individual to seem to have the same level of access at an Auburn school that this Nicholas Cruz is? They say alleged. Let's cut to the chase. He's it.
Absolutely.
So how, sue me. So how do you deal with that access issue?
So one thing that Auburn has that we started putting in place back in 2007, we have a 0-point access in all of our buildings, which means all of our doors are locked throughout the entire school day.
And do you know if that was the case in Parkland?
I don't.
Okay.
What I've heard was it was an open campus, which really makes me think.
Well, it looked like it was several buildings.
Correct.
So it makes it tough to
keep them always locked all day long.
Well, and the downside of a Florida school is in nice weather like now, they can walk outside from place to place. We go outside 2 weeks ago and you're going to freeze.
Correct.
So it's the way of the design of the campus
It
itself.
is. And that also gets that catch-22 of my number one piece every day, all day long, is safety of children. But sometimes it becomes uninviting to the community. Right. We've got to make sure our children are safe. So we have buzzer systems in every one of our buildings with cameras. So the only way you can get into any of our buildings, including the high school, which we implemented 3 months ago, everyone has to buzz in, and we have to let them in after we find out who they are and what they need.
So there are a lot of accusations flying about Mr. Cruz and not identifying him as a problem. And of course, it's always after the fact that everybody sees everything 20/20.
Correct.
Hindsight's perfect. What steps does New York State and Central New York schools take so that you identify somebody before you get to that stage?
And again, I think if everybody had the answer, we would never have this issue in any of our buildings. But what we can do is we're very vigilant. We have at-risk meetings where we sit down and we talk about especially children. If we get any concerns in the community, I call Sergeant Dan up immediately.
He's your head of your SRO
Sergeant Dan is the head of our SRO program. Whenever I have a concern, he goes and investigates immediately. We try to be proactive in what we do. We actually are also putting in, it's called the Raptor system, so that when visitors come in, they'll actually have to use their license and run through a scanner. It prints out a name card like they have at the hospital.
At a hospital, okay.
So we are in the process of purchasing those. We should have those up and running within the next month.
So last Tuesday, you had an active shooter exercise at Auburn High School. First of all, what is that?
So our police department does these regularly.
So this had no connection to Parkland whatsoever?
No, I believe it was scheduled before then. They used to do it at West Middle School.
Okay.
But I think it's more noticeable when they're doing it actually at our high school versus at West when
the
West
mayor was on
empty.
last week and he was talking. He had visited.
Correct, and they continue to do this again. I think that Auburn sort of set the trend when we talk about lockdown drills. We were one of the first ones in the state that were actually doing practice lockdowns back in 2007 with police presence there. And I know our BOCES with Mark Snyder, at their BOCES, they were the other building that were starting to do those and with evacuations. So I think we set the trend. We've really been practicing lockdown drills for 11 years now.
So next Thursday, Chief Sean Butler will be here, Sergeant Dan, and Officer Chris Major, who's an SRO there. But for just real quickly, can you tell us what occurs at a drill like that?
So the first thing is we don't know it's even happening. Sergeant Dan schedules it with his guys. with his officers. On the way there, they'll call the district office to let us know 5 minutes before that they're doing a lockdown at whatever building they're doing. They'll call the secretary up and say, put your school in lockdown. It automatically goes in lockdown. The police take complete control of the
And do you
building.
only do this when students are not in the building for the drills?
No, we do it when students are in the buildings.
Okay, but last week wasn't school vacation.
That was an active shooter training.
Training, okay.
That's different than a lockdown drill.
Okay, so who participated last week?
Just the police officers.
Okay, and I know there's some volunteer nurses that
Right, they have some staff that comes in, but our lockdown drills are run by our police department, and they started by the police department and they end with the police department saying the building is safe.
So there are a lot of proposals out there right now in the wake. Everybody's got a great idea, or so they say. So obviously the president has suggested arming teachers, and I think his press secretary, not Ms. Huckabee, had suggested 20% of teachers in the nation, and I thought I saw a calculation that it's only 640,000 people. What do you think of that proposal?
Keep the guns outside of our buildings, because that's
Other than a police officer?
Well, yeah, our SROs, that's what they're trained for. And again, they're not trained for that. They're trained to teach respect for the law and teach about the law, but they're also there for our kids' safety. But I don't think arming teachers is the answer. If I really had what the answer would be, is I would say, Governor Cuomo, use that community schools money. Instead of telling us to always have to do something new, let us use that to fund more SROs.
So Senator Pat Gallivan of Western New York has suggested that money that part of the increase this year, and we'll get to that's why you're here, by the way.
Right, yes, I do.
The money that's in the budget, part of that should go to making sure, and it's my word, not his. I think he's saying SROs, but armed officers on every campus. Is that what we really need? So it sounds like a lot of districts, unlike Auburn, don't have this.
There's many that don't. Some use the sheriff's department, some use state troopers. And again, I don't even know if state troopers are allowed to anymore. They used to, because that's what we had when I was in a school district in Rochester. But the Auburn Police Department is our SROs. They serve.
So do you think Senator Gallivan's idea is a great
Absolutely perfect idea.
Do you worry that districts that have already started this just don't get reimbursed?
Well, that is a concern, but for some place like Auburn, I could use 4 more SROs because I'd like to have one in every building.
Okay. So let me go back to this issue of the arming teachers, because the other part of this that the president has, I think, suggested is that we give a bonus to teachers. Any thoughts on financial incentives to have people bring guns to work?
None whatsoever. Just
you don't have an opinion,
no, I have no desire to
Okay.
even look into that. I mean, again, first of all, why would I ever put a teacher in that position of that responsibility?
And I guess the other thought I always have is that when Washington says they'll fund something this year, that it becomes an unfunded mandate
Correct.
the year after.
Correct.
The other issue, though, that I do think seems to have some resonance has been this issue of metal detectors. I'm assuming Auburn does not have metal detectors.
We do not have metal detectors.
Do you think we're going to be at a point where you're going to have to?
Again, it's a great question to bring up, and I do know there are some city school districts that do have metal detectors.
I mean, one of the hot things right now is buying kids backpacks with Kevlar.
Yeah.
And
right.
where it would seem to be at that stage.
Right, and covering themselves up during the lockdown drill with their, I've seen a lot of videos, some of the different monies that school districts have paid to really make sure that their schools are safe, and they can spend a lot of millions and millions of dollars doing that.
So if you didn't have enough on your plate last week, you got news about Cayuga Centers was making some announcements on Wednesday. I believe it was Wednesday. Thursday. What exactly did they announce that affects the Auburn? I forget. I know they're laying off 120 employees. That's separate. They want to come on and talk about that. That's a different issue. But there is some specific programs that you have there.
Yes. So we have the on-site school grounds there. We do the
Principal Ron
residential.
Gorney and others.
Principal Ron Gorney. We have 19 staff members that served the Cayuga Center's students. And I was informed by actually Mr. Gorney on Thursday that.
So you didn't get a call from Cuga Centers, their board had met and said they were closing the school.
Apparently they met on Wednesday. I found out by my building principal on Thursday.
So, so separating that piece of communications lapse, I guess the question is, when is it effective?
It's immediate.
So okay, so you have 19 employees there. I know we're fooling around with our schedule today so that you could meet with them earlier. So what is happening on that front? Because I know you're meeting with the Board of Education
So
tonight.
I'll be meeting with the board this evening to have conversation, but unfortunately it's going to cause layoffs, mid-year layoffs in our district.
And that's rare.
Very, very rare.
Okay, so
Very rare.
So how many people are going to be affected by this?
Well, there's 19 total, and I think that there's going to be probably 7 or 8 teacher layoffs, as well as 5 teacher aide layoffs.
And because there are people there who have some seniority, do they get to bump other employees?
Correct. So it has a
And so
ripple
this
effect throughout the whole district.
So this is separate than what we're going to get into in a few minutes, which is the budget issue.
Correct.
This is just this. So what about the children? So they, I'm not belittling the impact on employees. There are children there. Where do those children end up going? Are they going back to their home districts?
They'll go back to their counties, and the counties will have to find
Because
different
rarely are they
placement for them.
Auburn.
Correct. They'll have to find different residential placement, but the counties will have to do that.
There was a story in the Citizen. You sent an email to Edward Myers Hayes, who's the executive director. You sent him an email saying what was going on. What was the reply?
The reply that was that he was going to call me later to inform me that morning of what took place.
And have you since talked to him?
Nope, just through
Okay.
email.
And did that school generate revenue for Auburn?
No. So actually what happens is we had about a $2.9 million budget of our 19 employees over at Cayuga Centers, plus the renting of the building. And how we receive that money back is by setting tuition and charging the counties of where the children were coming
So it's like
through.
a chargeback.
Correct.
Okay.
But unfortunately, the reason why I was so shocked that it closed is because Ed and I were working on a contract because we were about $400,000 in the hole because they only had around 17 to 20 students in their care from September until December. And we usually charge based on 45 kids. So we were way behind in payment.
So there were some red flags for you already.
Well, we thought we were working that out by coming up with a contract to try to make sure that we were at net zero by next November. And they got their numbers up, started increasing. They were up to around 25 or 26. They told us they were hopefully going to be at 30 by March. And
So this occurred on school break, so this is effective immediately. So when did those people get laid off? Are they?
it's going to be fairly quickly.
Okay, because you have a process. You have a labor issue. That's a separate issue. There's a process for layoffs. People don't lose their job today at 5 o'clock.
No, and again, I'll be speaking to the board, and we'll be speaking about that,
Okay.
and then hopefully have a resolution at tonight's meeting.
So let's talk about what I really had you coming on for. Where are you in your budget process?
It's just getting worse. With this layout, this happening is causing our deficit to be bigger because we're not going to be able to recover that $400,000 that we've lost from September on with them closing.
So your expectation is you're not going to bill them, and they're not going to write you a check for $400,000.
I don't think that that's going to be happening.
Okay. So with that, so separate from Cayuga Centers, where are you in the overall budget process?
So we're around a $4 million budget deficit. We're going to be using some of our reserves and nickel and diamond again, hopefully getting us down to about $2.5 million deficit. And again, unfortunately, I'm going to be looking at some layoffs. I'm looking at taking some special ed programs back from BOCES and in our junior high school, so that we'll be setting up our own junior high, trying to find a savings.
But that will have a downward effect on BOCES.
Well, no.
well.
I've given them plenty of notice.
Okay. No, but in the long term, they will have less programming there.
Well, right, and we'll
Okay.
try to accommodate if we had openings, if they needed to send somebody to our, yeah, we'll help them anyway, our county schools.
So dollar-wise, is state aid up for you?
State aid went up 1 point some percent.
Okay.
It was, put it this way.
That doesn't knock a hole in a $4.4 million gap.
No, it was about a $400,000 increase. Our tax levy with the 2% tax cap, again, you'll have to explain it, is about 1.58% for us this year.
So 1.58 is because it's based on a number of calculations. This is my favorite part of the show.
I know it is because you're so good at it.
Because I think I've done it for every government now. So a whole series of calculations that bases, so it's not necessarily 2%. What does 1.58, what does that raise you?
So 1%.
If you went to the maximum tax cap.
1% is equivalent to about $290,000.
So you're talking less than $400,000.
So-
500.
So when you're looking at our tax levy plus our increase in foundation aid of $400,000, that's about $825,000. That doesn't even cover our increase in health insurance.
It's 1/5 of your
Oh, yeah.
shortfall. So you are going to. So you have a fund balance. How large is that right now, roughly?
4%.
4%. So a dollar amount. How much of your fund balance? How much are you going to be using?
About, well, we're looking about using about $1.3 million.
And what will that leave you in a rainy day fund?
About 2%.
Okay.
So we're using about half. And
There's a reason I'm asking you this question.
Yep, go ahead.
So it sounds structural. Does not sound like it's just something, unless the governor was going to go out there and write you a big check, which you're not expecting. Am I correct on
No,
that?
we are not.
This is a structural problem for Auburn, and part of it is based on the calculation. And we've had this. We've done half a dozen shows, 24 shows
Yep.
between you and JD Pavis
I know.
on foundation aid. So foundation aid is the basic formula that they use for funding all across the state of New York. Correct? In your opinion, it is the formula is unfair, but more importantly, it's more unfair to Auburn because we've been misclassified. Am I correct on that?
You're correct.
Okay, so explain that.
So again, we're a high need school district. Our poverty numbers continue to increase. They look at us, the state does, as an average needs because they look at data back from 2002 instead of 2018. So when they're looking at that, they're only giving us a certain percentage of the foundation aid. If they fully funded us, the foundation aid, we get an extra about $5 million. That's what we
Just
need.
this year?
Just this year.
And that would solve.
That would close our gap.
So a couple of years ago, you and members of the state legislature lobbied, but that was a one-time change. Am I correct on that?
That was for the gap elimination.
So we have not. So what are legislators? What are assembly members and senators telling you right now, especially when the state is facing its own multi-billion-dollar, and then of course you've got everybody who's got a new idea how to spend money, whether it's metal detectors or aid for SROs. What's your legislative delegation telling you?
There's no money out there. There's not going to be a lot of money. Again, we saw the initial budget. They need to come out with the finalized budget. They don't think the increases is going to be that big. So, some of the options I gave them is tell Governor Cuomo to stop going out with these competitive grants. Because again, there's some smoke and mirrors out there. Last year he said he gave $1 billion. When you looked at the actual money, it was about $650,000. Because a lot of it was
in aid.
In aid.
Because it's competitive for
It was
the remainder.
competitive grants. And again, most of the schools can't qualify for them because we don't have the characteristics to qualify for those
Or do you have the
competitive
staff
grants.
to apply for them?
Well, that's a whole other thing is writing them. But those competitive grants continue to pick and choose the school districts that they want to give the money to.
So you've lobbied, you've argued, you've banged your head against the desk. Why does the Cuomo administration not redo this classification for Auburn? Is it because if they do it for you, they got to do it for everybody?
Yeah, because they're the small city school districts. There's so many of us. But there is the Masto case. If you've done any research on the 8 small city school districts, they did win the appeal. We have 5 bills in right now.
But CFE won their appeal
correct.
in New York City, and it still hasn't changed the formula, does it?
Right. So
Because they just appeal to the ends of the earth.
correct.
Everybody gets a lawyer.
That's what they do, and we've got 5 acting bills right now that we're asking the legislators to vote on. 2 of the bills are just for the 8 small city school districts named in the lawsuit. One is for another western school district and setting up a type of capital reserve for them.
So are you part of this lawsuit?
We are not one of the 8
Okay.
schools, but there is 2 bills.
Is it because Auburn wasn't asked, or you decided?
No, we were asked. We didn't want to pay to be in it.
Oh, okay. Because you got paid.
Because it was during those years that we were hitting those big deficits.
Okay.
And the board said we can't afford to do it.
Okay.
So, but there are 2 bills that, and I sit on the Small City School District Board of Directors. There are 2 bills in there that would help Auburn greatly. One is the elimination of the IWI floor that I've talked about.
And what is that for those who?
The Income Wealth Index.
Okay.
So there's a floor that's set up at 0.65. So if you're a high poverty need district with an IWI under 0.65, it only will give you money as if you were at 0.65. So $1 is the average. We're at 0.52. If they eliminated the IWI, it would open us up to about $2.4 million more in foundation aid.
And do you have any hope that that will get?
Well, again, we're trying to meet with all the legislators to get those bills passed. If those bills get passed, that's one piece of one bill. Another piece of the bill is $400 more for every student in a small city school district. That would be huge for Auburn.
And there seemed to be some. I thought I read this the other day. There was some glimmer of hope in the budget for the future, in the sense that the governor did address high needs districts. It's a small piece. Was it $350 million out of the whole big piece?
But we'll take it.
But it's for the future.
Correct.
It does not. And how much is that of the overall school funding?
Oh, well, it
5%, 10%.
Yeah, right. And it depends again how long you're projecting that out for.
And if they'll do it again the following year.
Correct. That's the problem.
All right. So with all that, what does that mean practically for you and your board?
And again, unfortunately, it's going to come down to layoffs again. You know, we're trying to nickel dime as best we can. You know, we're looking at renting vehicles.
But somebody told me,
leasing.
a legislator told me a couple years ago, says, you know what, we made the tough cuts when it was austerity. Now we get to bone. And you can't nickel and dime bone.
But again, Guy,
you can try.
That's the issue. I keep saying to everybody, where do we go? Where do we go? Because our class numbers are up over 20. They're going to be 25 to 30 in all the elementary schools.
So do you have an idea of what you're looking at as a top number right now for cut? Because I know there's still process for the budget. Haven't got the one House bills done. They're hoping by March 27th or 28th because of Easter and April Fools, not connected by the way.
Right,
They just happen to be the same day, but they hope to have the budget done by then.
Which will be huge for us.
So that'll help you in your planning portion of
Absolutely.
it. But what is your top number? Are you not there yet of what your
I'm
cuts?
probably going to be looking at cutting between 1.8 and 2 million.
And how many staff does that equate to?
It's a ton.
It is.
You know, you're looking at about $75,000 to $80,000 per teacher. You know, it's maybe $100,000 an administrator. You know, and for the other bargaining units, it's around $40,000.
So is that something that there's a drop dead date for you on that? I know you're going to come back in April.
Correct.
You and Lisa Green, your
I will
business
hopefully
manager.
have a much better picture by
Well, at
then.
that point, you're about 4 weeks
Right.
before, because this still all has to get passed by the public.
Correct.
And what happens if you come up with all these cuts and they vote that down? What then happens?
Well, then we go to an austerity budget.
Could it be worse than what you're going to propose?
Correct.
It can be.
It can be.
So what does that eliminate? Like some transportation, some sports.
Yeah, it does eliminate equipment. We can't do any equipment. I'd have to charge for the use of facilities. So all the community groups that come in and use our facilities, we'd have to
Still next door, just Holland Stadium. Somebody wants to use Holland Stadium.
I'd have to charge
Charge for
every
that.
single group that comes in, except for, of course, our sport teams. You know, an austerity budget really.
So it could get worse.
Oh, absolutely.
And so when will you have to make decisions? I know it's mid-April where you will have a final budget.
Correct.
And this is the odd part. You do a final budget and then you have a public hearing.
Correct.
Versus the other way around.
I know. It is crazy. We talk about this every year.
Yeah,
too.
it's asinine to me because it's nice to hear the public, but they can't change anything.
Correct.
They
Correct.
can vent.
Right.
And they will.
Right. But we do.
And I'm not saying that's not a policy set. Let me just make this clear. As I understand it, that's not a policy set by Auburn.
No.
That is a state of New York
It
policy.
is a state of New York. But we have been known to do open workshops to invite the community in before to speak about those things. Like last year when we went to the 3.98 tax levy, we did have an open workshop where we invited community members in. You know, right now it looks like we're not going to exceed 1.58. So, you know, it's
Because you just don't think the public will.
well. Again, it's not.
There's also a weight that the public can bear.
How much more can we put on them? They stood behind us last year. It's time for the state to step up and give us the foundation aid we need for our children. You know, again, our enrollment stays pretty flat, but our poverty continues to go up.
So on that front, do you think voters translate your tough decisions, that there are 150 members of the legislature, of the assembly, 63 members of the Senate, and there's a governor? Do they ever blame them in this process?
Oh,
Or do they blame them globally?
I think Auburn is pretty well informed. I think that the people in our community understand what we're going for, and I think they do look at why isn't the governor giving us the foundation aid. Our legislators stick up for us. You know, you have Senator DeFrancisco on here.
He was on here last week, and he was blunt, as he normally is.
He always is blunt, you know, and I was pretty blunt with him the last time I met with him. We've done everything he's asked us to do. We've closed buildings. We've consolidated services. We've cut our staffing, but they still continue to cut us. When you look at our spending per pupil, we're at $17,500 per pupil. The state average is $23,500.
We're going to have you on in a couple of weeks to talk about this one. I did get one viewer question. That is, what is vaping?
Yeah. So vaping is.
This is not smoking.
It's not smoking. There's a vaping. What do they call them? Vaping devices.
Right.
That they get a liquid, sort of a vapor.
Okay.
It's a moisture.
So the question was, and I know you had an issue with a sport.
Yes, we did.
And the board reversed that decision?
They did.
Was that reversing your decision or a staff decision?
Well, again, my decision stayed pretty clear. I stated Monday that I wasn't going to reverse the decision. But what ended up happening is when we looked at our policy.
So that's where I'm going with this.
Correct. So again, it was when we rewrote the athletic code of conduct, we didn't know what vaping was. We thought it was smoking.
So you got policies for tobacco.
Correct.
You got policies for drugs.
Correct.
You got policies for alcohol.
Correct.
So vaping has to just be merged into there at some point.
We've already made the correction in our athletic code of conduct, but there was some ambiguity between our actual code of conduct and our athletic code of conduct.
So it's a consistency issue.
Our code of conduct had vaping in it. Our athletic one did not. So we made the changes we need, but again, we're always going to side on the caution on the side of children.
Okay. I only asked that we got a viewer question, and
it's a great question.
They said their first question was, "What is it?" And I'm not a science guy.
Well,
so.
in vaping, again, when we rewrote the athletic code of conduct, I think we thought that vaping was the same as smoking, and it wasn't. Okay. So we never added that word.
We do want to thank Auburn Superintendent of Schools, Jeff Parozzola. He's had a very busy week, and it is only Tuesday. He has a Board of Education meeting tonight that you'll be reading about, I'm sure, in the paper tomorrow. He'll be back at the end of April with District Business Manager Lisa Green. So we want to thank you for your time to talk to us, not only about what's going on financially, but Parkland and school shootings and Cayuga Home for Children, or Cayuga Centers, excuse me. We'll be right back with a special edition of, our premiere edition of Beyond the Front Page featuring Habitat for Humanity. We'll be back on Thursday with another Inside Government with J.J. Woods, the new county administrator, who will be on to make an appearance where it will be his first time on Inside Government. We'll also have a discussion about the Cayuga Fund, which celebrates its 10th anniversary With us on Beyond the Front Page will be Andrew Fish and Michael O'Gorman, who are two individuals who are on that board as well. Next week, we'll have two Beyond the Front Pages on Tuesday. President Jonathan Gibraltar of Wells College will be talking about how the state is affecting his college campus as well with the Excelsior Scholarship. And we'll have Stephanie DeVito, the head of the Auburn's Downtown Business District as well. And then next Thursday, as we have mentioned, we will have Chief Sean Butler as well as Sergeant Greg Dan and SRO Chris Major to talk about the active shooter exercise that was held at Auburn High School last week, especially in light of the Parkland shootings. We'll be back over the rest of the next several weeks with several guests, including Cuyahoga County Legislative Chair Pat Mahunick will be on, as well as City Manager Jeff Dygert. We'll have discussions about the Auburn Public Theater, as well as Hospice of the Finger Lakes, which is celebrating a significant anniversary. I'm Guy Cosentino for Cuyahoga Community College. We want to thank you for watching us tonight. We hope you have a good evening. Stick around for the show on Habitat for Humanity and their Hooli for Habitat discussion next Friday night on March 9th. But until then, have a good evening, have a great tomorrow, and we'll see you back in the studio on Thursday.